Thank you for showing up as early as you are.
In Vegas.
In Vegas. The title of our presentation this morning is The Power of Face-to-Face, engaging audiences, as we're emerging out of this pandemic and then post-pandemic. And I'm Scott Cullather. I am the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Invent Group and the co-founder of our live events business called Invent.
And I'm Kristina McCoobery. I serve as the Chief Operating Officer of the group, but I'm also the proud CEO of our live events business, Invent.
And while our presentation does have a formal title, I would suggest that the fact that we're in Las Vegas at 9 o'clock in the morning and the amount of Gatorade and breakfast sandwiches that are out there, I would actually unofficially call this the hangover session. So thank you all very, very much for being here. Before we get into our presentation, which will take about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up for any Q&A that anybody has. First off, we just want to say on behalf of both Kristina and myself, thank you to all of you for showing up for the hangover session. But most importantly, thank you to the organizers of MARsum for having us present at this amazing event that's happened over the last couple of days, but most importantly for leaning in and having a face-to-face hybrid event, one of the first industry events that Kristina and I have spoken at, and we used to speak at dozens of them every year, and we haven't been to one where we presented in over 15 months. So good on you, MARsum. The industry is back. The pandemic is going away, and let's jump into it.
Right, so we thought we'd give you a little context as who we are as an agency, since that'll influence the content we're about to share with you. So the Invent Group is a global agency, as you can see from this fun map. We have offices all around the world. We have over 120 employees, and we were founded as a live events agency. But this time last year, what we did was we realized, if you could advance my slide, thank you. What we realized was that it wasn't enough to just shift to the virtual space for our live events business. What we found was that our clients and our partners were really in need of other resources in order to communicate with their stakeholders, their customers, et cetera. And what that was brand strategy. How do they shape their brand during the pandemic? How is it impacting their company's culture? How are they delivering what became a crucial component of their content, which is digital content, right? So what we did was we launched the group, and we now have 4 business units within the group, which is Folk Hero, meaning heavy, and then the live events business, which is Invent.
And interestingly enough, these may seem like they're disparate disciplines, which they are, but if you look at leaders of brands and organizations, they're charged really with, amongst other things, 4 main things. Setting the strategy and the single organizing principle and the messaging, that's what Folk Hero does. Getting the culture aligned with all of that and bringing that messaging down through the organization, that's what Meaning does. Amplify that messaging, corporate strategy, brand identity out to the world through digital, traditional, OTT, et cetera. That's what Heavy does. And then, of course, bring the brand to life in an experiential way, and that's what Invent does.
Right, and so we're fortunate enough to do this for many corporations around the world, everything from tech to consumer-facing to pharmaceutical to automotive. And we share this information with you not as a commercial for our agency, but to provide you a little bit of context as we move into what we are now going to talk about, which is the unbelievable impact of face-to-face events, which is what we do all day, every day.
Yeah, and the brand positioning behind Invent, our live events business, is the live brand story agency and challenge everything. We do see ourselves as a challenger agency for challenger brands, and if you see the slides over here on the screen, many of the largest brands in the world also consider themselves challenger brands. So let's talk about this emergence of live and why it's become such an important part of a marketing matrix. And the primary reason is that marketers and brands have realized over the last 5 to 7 years how important the ever-elusive generation of millennials and Gens is. As much shit as the generations get, they're actually the ones that all the brands are diving towards and all the ones that are trying to attract. Because over half the world's population is made up of millennials and Gens, and it's a known fact that they want one thing more than anything else, and that's a live, shareable, face-to-face experience. In fact, it's been predicted that by 2023, the experience economy will be over $8 trillion because of this fact that millennials and Gens want one thing more than anything else. In fact, Christine and I are married, and we often joke that when I asked her to marry me, if we were millennials or gens, instead of giving her an engagement ring, she would have rather had me take her to Coachella. That's how important these experiences are for this generation. In addition to being the largest population in the world right now, they are the largest group of consumers of live content. And they are the largest group of consumers. In fact, 63% of this generation actually watches live streaming content every single day.
So, return of the Roaring '20s. We're certainly not the first person to coin that. It's talked about quite a bit, and there's a good reason why, right? So 100 years ago, coming out of the massive flu pandemic, we launched into what was considered the Roaring '20s. We see that happening again now, and in a huge way. The face-to-face, live event, large-scale events are back, and they're back really big, right? Everything from Bruce Springsteen returning to Broadway, to Coachella announcing their we will be there, the 2022 dates for Coachella, all of that. They're back in a really big way, but I think one thing that we are focused on, and I think is a really important point, they're not gonna return to what it looked like 2 years ago. The live, face-to-face, in-person, large-scale events have to look different. We cannot forget that we just went through 15 months of virtual communication and virtual engagement. We need to take all of the best practices and the things we learned from that and weave it into what will now be the new way of doing a live event.
So what happened in April or May of last year is the live experience industry completely shut down, as we all know. And we were forced to do things differently, not just as an events agency, but as everybody in this room, everybody all around the world, everybody logging in on the YouTube platform. And it meant that doing things differently with a different platform, completely virtual, with people in their own homes or in isolation, how do you bring them together? Right. And a different platform really is defined by different rules of engagement. And so we're going to share with you some of the things that we learned over the last 15 months that have helped us really dramatically increase engagement, help build on ROI, help achieve KPIs, and so on. So engaging audiences virtually requires something that we've coined as be brief, be bold, and be out. So unlike the days of, and we're seeing a great example of it here today, the MARsum sessions are very short, succinct sessions. The days of the 90-minute keynote presentations and on and on and on talking is over. Be brief with the messaging, be succinct, be on brand, on point, on message. Offer moments, firework moments we call them, that are bold moments that keep people engaged and surprised and delighted. And then when you're done, be out quickly. One of the other things that became a foundation of the virtual experiences that we were designing is represented with this Venn diagram. And that is to be able to take the best of what you can only experience and do at a live, face-to-face, in-person meeting, combine that with the best of what you can only do in your own home, maybe eliminate some of the things you do in your own home, and then overlay this digital component. And if you can find the right solution, the right mix of ingredients to do that, it's a very engaging and very powerful way to communicate to audiences and build brand loyalty and customer and consumer love. Right, and when we're talking about, obviously we're talking primarily about the face-to-face meetings coming back, but I think the reason we're sharing with you these virtual components and the success of them is because they're gonna have to be part of this face-to-face meeting. We can't just leave that behind as if it's not something that people are going to want to do, right? So now we're taking the hybrid route, right? This is a great example, this conference, right? So it's streaming and it's also here face-to-face. We've been doing the hybrid approach now for well over a year. We were very fortunate as an agency that we had produced many hybrid events pre-pandemic where we would stream to millions of people, some product launches that we were doing, et cetera. So we shifted super fast, which was great and good for our business. But now what we're seeing is that the hybrid piece probably isn't going to go away. So what we're going to share with you now is some of the hybrid events we did a year ago. We're still seeing them, right? They're not going away. So we've done TEDx in Sydney, that was hybrid. We had people in the room and we had tons of people streaming it virtually. And we recently, this last summer, we did the launch of the Hummer EV for General Motors. They took live, in-person, face-to-face journalists on site,
hundreds of them, but they streamed to over 50 million. So they took a film approach to the launch of the Hummer EV. Let's take a look.
It's forward on, break through to the other side. Time's almost up. I won't risk my love. I got more to burn. I just gotta stand up and fight. If you wanna survive, gotta face the fury.
Okay, you guys get the point on that. I think the big question in the debate moving forward is, is virtual or digital going to be the cherry or the cake? And is the live face-to-face going to be the cherry or the cake? So, brands are debating this. Organizations are debating this.
We're debating this.
We're debating this. We actually have different points of view on this.
We do.
Regardless, though, as Kristina said earlier, because we were forced to do things differently the last 15 months, we have new audiences now. We have audiences that we've never been able to reach before through the virtual platforms, through the technology. We also learned how to communicate and produce differently to those audiences. And so moving forward, whether live face-to-face is the cake or not, or whether virtual is the cake or not, it doesn't matter. We're going to have to adapt and play with both strengths moving forward.
Right, and so the key to a hybrid event, which again is what we see as the future, no brand's going to give up the scalability that provides, right? The Hummer example is a great example of that. It's also an on-demand feature, right? So people in the virtual space can watch on demand. You can attend it face-to-face, and then if you return after that event, you can even watch it again on demand if you want to capture another resource. It's immersive. It certainly democratizes the audiences and who can have access to what events. And last, and certainly not least, and this is the power, of course, of that virtual component, is the data capture.
So let's talk a little bit about each of these components. Content intelligence. This is an important one because we're now having to design content for different, well, we already have to anyways because of the different demographics in a live face-to-face event, but now we're designing content that's created for live in-person face-to-face attendees as well as the virtual attendees. So the content has to have a certain level of sensitivity, a certain level of cinematography that never was a requirement before. Also, you see it commonplace now. We call it the wall of faces, but in the early days of early spring of last year, summer of last year, this was a brand new concept. Now you see it at the award shows on television, you see it at sporting events, et cetera, where you're able to create the virtual audience and actually put them in the room through this wall of faces and have them interact not only with people who are on stage and performing, but also interact with other attendees at these different experiences. Gamification is a big one. So we used to do these silly games in face-to-face meetings. Now we have this whole opportunity to use the technology, largely due to Epic and Riot Games, and this notion that millennials and gens also like to game. We have an opportunity to create experiences that now have a very healthy level of gamification. And as this slide shows, the esports industry is going to be $37 billion by 2027. It is not going to escape live experiences or face-to-face experiences. In fact, Walmart, in its simplest form, did a really great job last year at their holiday event where they did a simple trivia contest for all of their employees on their products and services. Level of engagement was up, knowledge retention was up, collaboration was up, community building, et cetera.
Right, and it's also a way for the face-to-face attendees to connect with the virtual attendees if there's one gamification element that crosses both of those.
And then look for fully immersive experiences as well. Travis Scott did a collaboration with Fortnite last year where he did a live virtual conference. He was a avatar. 75 million people attended that conference, blew the roof off the place. And I think a super example of it right now is the Van Gogh exhibit in New York City, which you go in and you're completely immersed in the work and the art and history of Van Gogh rather than just being a bystander at a museum experience.
Right, and still experiencing that face-to-face. So Scott mentioned the long keynote that I'm sure many of you have attended, anywhere between 30 and an hour, right? And so what's gonna need to happen now is, again, just as we can't return to what a face-to-face large-scale event looked like 2 years ago, the keynote has to change as well, right? We need to recognize that the way people consume information and content has completely changed. You can't make that big of a departure over a 15-month period of time in a society and not expect it to have a major impact moving forward. So those keynotes now need to be snackable, digestible, under 30 minutes, and quick moving. So that's a big piece that we see is going to be impacted.
Yeah, and then as Kristina said, we have the power of data now. So we can leverage data and analytics like never before. And what's interesting about that is the data allows you to shape a message, shape a campaign, shape an experience, or take it one step further and use predictive analytics to actually predict a future outcome based on previous results. So there's this super interesting notion of data and analytics that now come into play into live face-to-face engagements.
So one of the last examples we'll show you, this was the last face-to-face, in-person hybrid event that we did before the pandemic shut down. So we launched a new product for Samsung. They're one of our largest clients. We're going to show this to you because this actually was the hybrid before we went into the pandemic. They do it so well. In fact, they shot the entire event and streamed it through their device. Let's take a look.
Okay, shoot.
Brand new Galaxy S20.
You can capture scenes with a level of detail you've never experienced.
100 times zoom. You now have the most versatile storytelling tool.
You can capture videos in stunning 8K. With AI, you can use this revolutionary camera to the fullest. Streaming today's event with S20 devices.
As Samsung's mobile entertainment partner.
My friend Hiroshi from Google.
Introducing Galaxy Buds Plus.
And so we
Galaxy Z Flip is a statement smartphone.
till the night turns into day. Push on the beat, keep it
We have created something truly special.
Thank you.
As you can see, it was a highly successful experiential event. We had about 5,000 people in the live face-to-face experience, but over 75 million people tuned in to watch this virtually. So, the last point here is that we clearly have the ability to amplify, live face-to-face experiences unlike ever before, which is another really important way to engage audiences and create reach.
Yeah, and so not to end on a bummer note of a budget, but This is going to be a very interesting conversation as the face-to-face events return in such a big way, because as most of our partners and clients and everyone realize that executing a virtual event is not exactly a fraction of the cost of producing a face-to-face live event. It has all kinds of cost implications. So who's going to double down and do a really great interactive, all the bells and whistles of a virtual event, plus putting everybody, in a large venue? We don't have the answer to that yet. We're ready to have those discussions with all of our clients and partners, because I think it's going to be a really important one. Some, I think, that can monetize that virtual piece will absolutely double down.
So that brings us to the end. I want to begin by how I started, or we started, and that is to thank all of you and to thank MARsum for having us here today. We're thrilled to be here. I also want to say that I've been in the business, the marketing communications industry for 35 years. We have had our ups and downs over the last 35 years. The last 15 months have been challenging, not just for our industry, the Marcom sector, but also for the world. I can't tell you on behalf of Kristina and myself how humbled, how proud, and how excited we are to be in such an industry full of creative, inspiring, dedicated, committed, smart people who have proven a sense of resiliency unlike anything we've ever seen in our life. So with that said, a thank you again, and we'll open it up for any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.